Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. We're reading Faust by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. This is a drama translated by Bayard Taylor. We're reading Acts 11 through 18. We just finished the last time when we met Faust. He had met Margaret and Martha, her friend, and some interesting things were going on. So let's continue, shall we? Act 11. This is 11:18. Ready? This is a street. Faust and Mephistopheles are on the street. Faust says, "How is it? Underway and soon complete?" Mephistopheles, bravo! Do I find you burning? Well, Margaret soon will still your yearning. And neighbor Martha's you'll this evening meet. A fitter woman ne'er was made to ply the pimp and gypsy trade. Faust, 'tis well. Mephistopheles, yet something is required from us. Faust says, one service pays the other thus. Mephistopheles says, well, we've but to make a deposition valid that now her husband's limbs, outstretched and pallid, at Padua rest in consecrated soil. If you'll remember, Martha's husband died in the last reading, and Mephistopheles told Martha about that. Faust says, most wise, and first, of course, we'll make the journey thither? Mephistopheles says, Sancta Simplicitas, there's no need of such a toil. Sancta Simplicitas, holy innocence, depose with knowledge or without it either way. Faust says, if you've naught better, then I'll tear your pretty plan. Mephistopheles, now there you are, O holy man. Is it the first time in your life you've driven to bear fault witness in a case? Oh God, the world and all that is in it has a place of man and all that moves the being of his race. Have you not terms and definitions given with brazen forehead, daring breast? And, if you'll probe the thing profoundly, knew you so much, and you'll confess it roundly. As here, Schwallinger's death, and place of rest. Faust says, thou art, and thou remain a sophist liar. Mephistopheles says, yes, I know. I not more deeply thy desire, for thou wilt not no lover fair. Poor Margaret flatter, and ensnare her, and all thy soul's devotion swear her? Faust, and from my heart. Mephistopheles says, it's very fine, yeah. Thy endless love, thy faith assuring, the one almighty force enduring. Will that too prompt this heart of thine? Faust says, hold it will. I'm telling you, if such my flame, and for the sense and power intense I seek and cannot find the name, then range with all my senses through creation, carving the speech of inspiration, and call this ardor so supernal, heavenly, endless, eternal, and eternal. Is that a devilish lying game? Mephistopheles, and yet I'm right. Faust says, mark this, I beg thee, and spare my lungs henceforth. Whoever intends to have the right, if but his tongue be clever, will have it certainly. But come, the further talkings brings disgust, for those aren't right, especially since I must. 12, Act 12. It's a garden. Margaret on Faust's arm, they're walking together, and Martha, and Mephistopheles are walking up and down. So there's a couples, right? Margaret says, I feel the gentleman allows for me, demeans himself and shames me by it. A traveler that is so used to be kindly content with any diet. I know too well that my poor gossip can ne'er entertain such an experienced man. Faust says, a look from thee, a word more entertains than all the lore of the wisest brains. He kisses her hand. Oh. Margaret. Don't incommode yourself. How could you ever kiss it? It's so ugly and rough to see. What work do? How hard and steady is it? Mother is too close with me? They pass. Martha says, and you, sir, travel always, do you not? Mephistopheles says, alas, that trade and duty us so hairy. With what a pang one leaves so many a spot, and dares not even now and then to tarry. Martha says, in young wild years it suits your ways, this round and round the world in freedom sweeping. But then come on the evil days, and so as bachelor into his grave a creeping, none ever found a thing to praise. Mephistopheles says, I dread to see how such a fate advances. Martha says, well then, worthy sir, improve betimes your chances. They pass. Margaret says, yes, out of sight is out of mind. Your courtesy and easy graces, but you have friends in other places, and sensibler than I you'll find. Faust says, trust me, dear heart, what men call sensible is often mere vanity and narrowness. Margaret, how so? Faust, well, the simplicity and innocence never know themselves their holy value and their spell. That meekness, lowliness, the highest graces which nature portions out so lovingly. Margaret says, so you think a moment's space on me? All times I'll have to think on you in all places? Faust says, no doubt you're much alone. Margaret says, yes, for our household small has grown, and yet must be cared for, you alone. We have no maid. I do all the knitting, sewing, sweeping, cooking, early work and late. In fact, and mother in her notions of housekeeping, she's so exact. Not that she needs so much to keep expenses down. We, more than others, might take comfort rather. A nice estate was left to us by my father. A house, a little garden near the town. But now my days have less of noise and hurry. My brother is a soldier. My little sister is dead. True, with the child a troubled life I led. And yet I would take again and willingly all the worry, so very dear was she. Faust says, an angel if thy like, if like thee. Margaret says, I brought it up, and it was fond of me. Father had died before it saw the light, and mother's case seemed hopeless quite, and so weak and miserable she lay, and she recovered then, and so slowly day by day, she couldn't think herself of giving the poor wee thing its natural living. And so I nursed it all alone, with milk and water. It was my own. Lulled in my lap with many a song, it smiled and tumbled and grew strong. Faust says, the purest bliss was surely then thy dower. Margaret says, but surely also many a weary hour I kept the baby's cradle near me, my bed at night, and if it ever stirred, I guessed it, waking I'd hear, and that I must nurse it. Warm beside me pressed it, and oft to quiet it my bed forsake, for dandling back and forth the restless creature take, and then at the washtub stand at morning break, and then the marketing and the kitchen tending, day after day, the same thing never ending. One's spirits, sir, are thus not always good. But then one learns to relish rest and food. They pass. Martha says, yes, poor women are bad off, it's true. A stubborn bachelor, there's no converting. Mephistopheles says, well, it depends upon the like of you, and I should turn to better ways than flirting. Martha says, speak plainly, sir. Have you no one detected? Has not your heart been anywhere subjected? Mephistopheles says, well, the proverb says, quote, one's own heart, one's own warm hearth, and a good wife are gold and jewels worth. Martha says, I mean, have you not felt desire, though ne'er so slightly? Mephistopheles says, everywhere. In fact, I've been entertained politely. Martha says, I mean to say, were you not touched in earnest ever? Mephistopheles says, well, one should allow oneself to jest with the ladies never. Ah, says Martha, you don't understand what I'm talking about. Mephistopheles says, I'm sorry I'm so blind, but I'm sure that you're very kind. They pass. Faust says, and me, thou angel, dost thou recognize as though the garden gate I came? Margaret says, did you not see it? I cast my eyes down. Faust says, and thou forgivest my freedom, and the blame to my impertinence befitting, as the cathedral thou wert quitting? Margaret says, look, I was confused. The like ne'er happened to me. No one could ever speak to my discredit. And thought I, in my conduct, has he read it? Something immodest or unseemly, free? He seemed to have the sudden feeling that which this wench 'twere very easy dealing. I'm going to confess I knew not what appeal on your behalf here in my bosom grew. But I was angry with myself to feel that I could not be angrier with you. Sweet darling, Faust says. Wait a while, Margaret says. She plucks a star flower and pulls off the leaves one after the other. Faust says, shall that be a nosegay? Margaret says, no, it's just a play. Faust says, how? Margaret says, you're going to laugh at me. She pulls off the leaves and murmurs, what are you murmuring? What murmurest thou? Margaret says, he loves me. He loves me not. Faust says, thou sweet angel soul, angelic soul. Margaret continues, love me not, loves me not. Plucking the last leaf, she cries with frank delight, he loves me. Faust says, yes, child, and let this blossom word for thee be speech divine. He loves thee. Ah, knowest thou what that means? He loves thee. He grasps both her hands. Margaret says, I'm all a tremble. Faust says, tremble not, but let this look, this warm clasp of hands declare thee what is unspeakable. To yield one wholly and to feel a rapture in yielding, that must be eternal, eternal. For the end would be despair. No ending, Martha, coming forward. The night is falling. Mephistopheles, yeah, we must away. Martha says, I'd ask you longer here to tarry, but evil tongues in this town have full play. It's as if nobody had nothing to fetch or carry, nor other labor, but spying on all the doings of one's neighbor. And one becomes the talk and do whatever one may. Where's our couple now? Mephistopheles says, I think they've flown up the alley yonder. The Wilfer's summer birds. Martha says, he seems of her still fonder. Mephistopheles, and she of him. So runs the world away. Act 8. A garden arbor. Margaret comes in, conceals herself behind the door, and puts her finger to her lips, peeps through the crack. Margaret says, he comes. Faust enters. Ah, rogue, a tease thou art, I have thee. And he kisses Margaret. Kisses her. Margaret says, clasping him and returning the kiss, dearest man, I love thee from my heart. Mephistopheles knocks. Faust stamping his foot. Who's there? Mephistopheles, a friend. Faust says, a beast. Mephistopheles, it's time to separate. Martha coming. Yes, sir, it's late. Faust says, may I not wait upon you? Margaret says, my mother would farewell. Faust says, can I remain? Farewell. Margaret says, adieu. Margaret says, and soon to meet again. Faust and Mephistopheles leaves. Margaret says, dear God, however is it such a man can think and know so much? I stand ashamed and in amaze, and I answer yes to everything he says. A poor unknowing child, and he, I can't think of what he finds in me. Act 14. Forest and cavern, Faust, solo. Spirit sublime, that gavest me all for which I prayed. Not unto me in vain, as thy countenance revealed in fire. Thou gavest me nature as a kingdom grand, with power to feel and to enjoy it. Thou not only cold amazed acquaintance yieldest, but grandest that in her profoundest breast I gaze as in the bosom of a friend. The ranks of living creatures thou dost lead before me, teaching me to know my brothers, in air and water and the silent wood. And when the storm and forest roars and grinds, the giant firs and falling neighbor boughs, and neighbor trunks with crushing weight bear down, and falling fill the hills in hollow thunders, then to the cave secure thou leadest me. Thou showest me mine own self, and in my breast the deep mysterious miracles unfold. And when the perfect moon before my gaze comes up with soothing light, around me float from every precipice and thicket damp the silvery phantoms of the ages past, and temper the austere delight of thought. That nothing can be perfect unto man, I am now conscious. With this ecstasy, which brings me nearer and nearer to the gods, thou gavest thy comrade, whom I know now no more can do without. Though cold and scornful, he demons me to myself, and with a breath, a word, transforms thy gifts to nothingness. Within my breast he fans a lawless fire. Unwearied, for that fair and lovely form, thus in desire I hasten to enjoyment, and in enjoyment pine to feel desire. Mephistopheles enters and says, have you not led this life quite long enough? How can a further test delight you? Come on, it's very well that once one tries this stuff, that something new must be then required to you. Faust says, would there other work for thee? Don't you have something else to do, to plague my day, auspicious thou returnest? Mephistopheles says, well, I'll engage to let thee be. Thou darest not tell me so in earnest. The loss of thee were truly very slight. Comrade crazy, rude, repelling. One has one's hands full all day and night, if what one does or leaves undone is right. And from such a face as thine, there's no telling. Faust says, there is again thy proper tone. Thou hast bored me. I must thankful be. Mephistopheles says, poor son of earth, how couldst thou thus alone have led thy life bereft of me? I, for a time at least, have worked thy cure. Thy fancy rickets plague thee not at all. Had I not been, so hast thou, sure, walked thyself off this earthly ball. Why here, to caverns rocky hollows slinking, searchst thou as were an owl a-blinking? Why suckest from the sodden moss and dripping stone, toad-like, thy nourishment alone? A fine way, this, to fill thy time. The doctor's in thy will still. Faust says, what fresh and vital forces canst thou guess, spring from my commerce with the wilderness? But if thou hast the power of guessing, thou wouldst be a devil enough to grudge my soul the blessing. Mephistopheles says, a blessing is drawn from supernatural fountains, in night and dew to lie upon the mountains, all heaven and earth in rapture penetrating, thyself to godhood hotly inflating. To grub the yearning force through earth's dark marrow, compress the 6 days' work within thy bosom narrow, to taste, I know not what, in haughty power, thy own ecstatic life, on all things shower, thy earthly self behind thee cast, and then the lofty instinct thus would adjust your, at last, I dared say how, to pluck the final flower. Shame on thee, says Faust. I wonder what he's saying that for. We'll have to figure it out in the analysis. Mephistopheles says, yeah, thou findest that unpleasant, huh? Thou hast the moral right to cry me shame at present. One dare not thus chaste ears declare, which chaste hearts, notwithstanding, cannot spare. And once and for all I grudge thee not the pleasure of lying to thyself in moderate measure. But such a course thou wilt not long endure. Already art thou overexcited, and if at last wilt soon be plighted to madness and to horror sure, enough of that. Thy love sits lonely yonder, and by all things saddened and oppressed, her thoughts and yearnings seek thee tenderer, fonder. Mighty love is in her breast. First came thy passion's flood and poured around her, and when from melted snow its streamlet overflows, thou hast therewith so filled and drowned her, that now thy stream all shallow shows. Methinks instead of the forest lording, thou, noble sir, should find it good the love of this young silly blood at once to set about rewarding. Her time is miserably long, and she haunts her window watching clouds that stray over the old city wall and far away. Were I a little bird, so runs her song, day and night, half night long, and now she's lively, mostly sad. Now wept beyond her tears, then again quiet she appears, always love-mad. Serpent, says Faust, serpent. I trap thee, says Mephistopheles in an aside. Faust says, Get thee away with thy offences, reprobate. Name not that fairest thing, nor the desire for her sweet body bring again before my half-distracted senses. Mephistopheles says, What wouldst thou do then? She thinks that thou art flown, and half thou art, I own. Faust says, But I'm near, and love keeps watch and ward. Though I were nearer so far, it cannot falter. I envy even the body of the Lord, the touching of her lips before the altar. Mephistopheles says, That's very well. My envy often reposes on your twin pair that feed among the roses. Faust says, Come on, let's move. Away, you pimp! Sorry. Mephistopheles says, You rail, and it is fun to me. The God who fashioned youth and made perceive the noblest purpose of his trade, and also made their opportunity go on. It is woe profound. This thou sweetheart's room you're bound. Come on, and not for death, indeed. Faust says, What are within her arms the heavenly blisses? Though I be glowing with her kisses, do I not always share her need? I'm the fugitive, all houseless roaming, the monster without air or rest, that like a cataract down rocks and gorges foaming, leaps maddened in the abyss's breast. And sideward she, the young unawakened senses, with her cabin on the alpine field, her simple homely life, commences, her little world therein concealed, and I, God's hate flung over me, had not enough to thrust the stubborn rocks before me and strike them into the dust. She in her peace I yet must undermine. Thou hell hast claimed this sacrifice as thine. Help me, devil, through the coming pangs to push me. What must be, let it quickly be. And let fall on me her fate and also crush me. One ruin, whelm both of her and me. The devil says, again it seethes. Again it glows. You fool, go in and comfort her. And when such a head as thine no outlet knows, and it thinks the end must soon occur, hail him who keeps a steadfast mind. Thou else dost well the devil nature wear, not so inspired and spid in the world I find as a devil in despair. 15. Margaret's room. Margaret, at the spinning wheel, she's alone. My peace is gone, my heart is sore, I shall never find it, nevermore. Save I have him near, the grave is here, the world is gall and bitterness all. My poor weak head is racked and crazed, my thought is lost, my senses mazed. My peace is gone, my heart is sore, and I never shall find it, nevermore. To see him only, at the pain I sit, to meet him only, the house I quit, his lofty gait, his noble size, the smile of his mouth, the power of his eyes, and the magic flow of his talk, the bliss in the clasp of his hand, his kiss. My peace is gone, my heart is sore, I never shall find it, nevermore. My bosom yearns for him alone. Dare I clasp him and hold and own and kiss his mouth to heart's desire, and on his kisses at last expire. That's powerful language, ladies and gentlemen. 16. Martha's Garden, Margaret and Faust. Margaret says, promise me, Henry. Faust says, what I can. Margaret says, how is it that thy religion, I pray? Thou art a dear, good-hearted man, and yet I think dost not incline that way. Faust says, leave that, my child. Thou knowest my love is tender, my love, my blood, and life would I surrender. And as for faith and church, I grant to each his own. Margaret says, well, that's not enough. We must believe thereon. Faust says, must we? Margaret replies, would that I have some influence. Then, too, thou honorest not the holy sacraments. Faust says, I honor the sacraments. Margaret says, desiring no possession? 'Tis long since thou hast been to mass or to confession. Believest thou in God? Faust says, my darling, who shall dare? I believe in God. To say, ask a priest, a sage, the answer to declare, and it will seem a mocking play, a sarcasm on the asker. Margaret says, well, then thou believest not. Faust says, hear me, not falsely, sweetest countenance. Who dare express him, and who profess him, saying, I believe in him, who, feeling, seeing, deny his being, saying, I believe him not. The all-enfolding, the all-upholding, folds and unfolds, he not thee, me, himself? Arches not there the sky above? Why not beneath us firm the earth, and rise not on us shining, friendly the everlasting stars? Look, I not eye to eye on thee, and feelest not, thronging to head and heart, the force, the weaving, its eternal secret, invisible, visible around thy life? vast as it is, fill with that force thy heart. And when thou is feeling the holy blessed art, call it what thou wilt. Call it bliss. Call it heart. Love, God, call it whatever you want. I have no name to give it. Feeling is all in all. The name its sound, smoke, obscuring heaven's clear glow. Margaret says, all that is fine and good to hear it so. Much the same way the preacher spoke, only with a slightly different phrases. Faust says, well, the same thing in all the places. All the hearts that beat beneath the heavenly day, each in its language say, well then, why not I and mine as well? Margaret says, to hear it thus, it may seem passable, and yet some hitch in it there must be, for thou hast no Christianity. Faust says, dear love. Margaret, I've long grieved to see that thou art in such company. Faust, how so? Margaret says, the man who goes with thee, thy mate. Within my deepest inmost soul, I hate. In all my life, there's nothing has given my heart so keen a pang of loathing as his repulsive face has done. Fear him not, my sweetest one, says Faust. Margaret, well, I feel his presence like something ill. I've, for all a kindly will, but much as my heart to see thee yearneth, the secret horror of him returneth. And I think that man is a knave as I live. And if I do him wrong, may God forgive. Faust says, there must be some queer birds, however. Margaret says, live with the like of him may I never. When once inside the door comes he looks around so sneeringly. And half in wrath, one sees that in nothing no interest he hath. 'Tis written on his very forehead, that love to him is a thing abhorred. And I am so happy to thine arm, so free, so yielding, and so warm, and yet his presence stifled seems my heart. Faust says, foreboding angel that thou art. Margaret says, it overcomes me in such a degree that wheresoever he meets us, even I feel as though I lost my love for thee. When he is by, I could not pray to heaven, and that burns within me like a flame, and surely, Henry, it's with thee the same. Faust says, there now is thy antipathy. Instinctive feeling of strong dislike. Margaret says, I must go. Faust says, shall there never be a quiet hour to see us finally plighted with breast to breast and soul to soul united? Margaret said, if I slept alone, I would draw the bolts tonight for thy desire. But mother's asleep, so light has grown, and if we were to be discovered by her, it would be my death upon the spot. Faust says, thou angel, fear it not. Here is a vial. In her drink put 3 drops, and the deepest sleep will on her senses sink. Margaret says, what would I not to give thee pleasure? If it will not harm her when one tries it? Faust says, it would, my love, would I advise it if it did? Margaret says, dearest man, if but thy face I see, I know not what compels me to thy will, so much as I have already done for thee, that scarcely more is left for me to fulfill. Enter Mephistopheles. Exit. Who exits? Margaret. Mephistopheles. The monkey, is she gone? Sorry. Faust says, have you played the spy again? Mephistopheles, look, I've heard more fully how she drew thee. The doctor has been chastised. It's plain. Great good. I hope the thing will do thee. The girls have much desire to ascertain. If one is prim and good, as ancient rules compel, if he's led, they think he'll follow them as well. Faust says, monster, wilt nor see nor own how this pure soul of faith, so lowly and so loving and so ineffable, the faith alone that her salvation is, the scruples wholly pines, lest she hold as lost the man that she loves so well, me. Mephistopheles says, thou full of sensual, supersensual desire, a girl by the nose is leading thee. Faust says, Burschen, thou of filth and fire. Mephistopheles says, and then how masterly she reads physiognomy. This is the practice of assessing a person's character. He's giving Margaret a compliment. Because when I'm present, she's impressed, and she knows not how. And she is my mask, a hidden sense would read. She feels that surely I'm a genius, perhaps the very devil indeed. Well, tonight? Are you going to do it tonight? Faust, what's that to thee? Yet my delight it will be also be. 17. At the fountain, Margaret and Lisbeth with pitchers. Lisbeth. Has nothing heard of Barbara? Margaret says, not a word. I got so little out. Lisbeth says, it's true. Sybil said today she played the fool at last, and there's no doubt that taking on such airs. Margaret, how so? It stinks, Lisbeth says. She's feeding two whenever she eats and drinks. Margaret says, here comes Lisbeth. And so at last it serves her rightly. She clung to the fellow so long and tightly that it was promenading, at village and dance parading, and at first they must be everywhere shine, and he treated her always to pies and wine, and she made it to do with her face so fine. So mean and shameless was her behavior that she took all the presents that the fellow gave her, and kissing and coddling and on and on. And so at the end, the flower's gone. Margaret, the poor thing. Lisbeth, you pity at that? Which one of us at spinning sat at mother nights and near let us out the door that she sported with her paramour, on the door bench and in the passage dark, the length of time that never mark? So now her head no more she'll lift, but do church penance in her sinner's shift. Margaret says, he'll surely take her for his wife. Lisbeth says, he'd be a fool. A brisk young blade has room elsewhere to ply his trade. Besides, he's gone. Well, that's not fair, says Margaret. Lisbeth, well, if him she gets, why let her beware. The boy shall dash her wreath at the door, and will scatter chaff before her door. Exit, Margaret returning home. How scornfully I once revelled when some poor maiden was beguiled. More speech than any tongue suffices I craved. To censor others' vices, black as it seemed, I blackened still, and blacker yet was in my will, and blessed myself, and I boasted high, and now a living sin am I. And yet all that drove my heart thither was God. So it was so good and so dear and so true. Act 18. Don John. In the niche of the wall there's a shrine with an image of the Mater Dolorosa and a pot of flowers. Margaret says, putting fresh flowers in the pots, incline, O maiden, thou sorrow laden, thy gracious countenance upon my pain. The sword thy heart with anguish smarting, thou lookest up to where thy son is slain. Thou seest the father, the sad sighs gather, and bear aloft thy sorrow and his pain. Past guessing, beyond expressing, the pangs that wring my flesh and bone, why this anxious heart so burneth, why it trembleth, why it yearneth, knowest thou, and thou alone? Wherever I go, what woe and sorrow within my bosom aches. Alone and unsleeping and weeping and weeping and weeping, the heart within me breaks. The pots before my window, alas, my tears that wet, as in the early morning, for thee these flowers I set. Within my lonely chamber the morning sun shone red. I sat in utter sorrow, already on my bed. Help! Rescue me from death and stain, O maiden! Thou sour laden, incline thy countenance upon my pain. And we're going to stop there. You've been reading Faust. This is Acts 11 through 18. Be sure to visit and read other classics on my website. Be sure to finish it. We got one more reading of this wonderful story of the devil and Faust. And remember, if you have questions, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy at reading. We're going to analyze this play in at least a couple of parts because it's very profound. And I hope you're enjoying it. I'm trying to give it my all. I don't pronounce all the words all the time correctly, but I'm doing my best. This is Jimmy. Thanks for coming by. Enjoy your day. And remember, be careful who you make a deal with. Very important.